Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Heavyweights podcast, an interview edition. And man, I can't tell you how excited I am for this specific interview. The guy that we have on today is, a good friend. He actually is probably the reason that this podcast exists. The sort of pushed me down the road to even want to do this. But we've known each other for a long time. We kind of lost touch there for a few years, but he's just a really great guy. He's done a ton in the real estate business, and I'm excited for him to be here. And we want to welcome Josiah Smelser. What's up, Josiah?
Hey, man, it's so cool to be here, man. I know Cindy Murray is smiling down on this.
Yeah. So I'll give a little background. So Josiah and I was trying to think of the years. Josiah, we probably
Like
15
maybe
years.
2008, 2009, something
Yeah.
like that.
So probably 15-ish, 16 years. We crossed paths. I worked for a nonprofit in northern Louisiana, Monroe, West Monroe. It's called the Center for Children and Families. I was the director of the Children's Advocacy Center. We did interviews with kids, 250 interviews a year, kids that had been abused. They brought them to our place. We facilitated those interviews. And so that was my division. Josiah, he came through, and I don't even know that you had a specific job at first. I think Cindy just met you and said, we just have to have this guy on staff. I don't know what you're going to do yet, but we just have to have you around. That's how it happened, right?
She had somebody leave that was doing some financial work for her, and I had just trained at Olive Garden. I'd moved down there because I was dating Sarah at the time, so we could be in the same place, and I'd gotten a job at Olive Garden. I'd literally been there 2 weeks, and Cindy met me and was talking to me about my background, and she's like, "Oh, we just had somebody leave. We could use your help, doing financial stuff." And it was like 10 times the pay that I was making at Olive Garden. So I was like, "All right, see you guys."
Yeah,
I'm sure my trainer was really happy at that.
yeah. Well, you were way over qualified for Olive Garden, So, but yeah, so we worked together for, I don't know, probably close to a year at the Center for Children and Families,
Yeah.
and then you kind of went off and did your thing, and we lost touch a little bit there for a while, and so why don't you just, we don't have to go. So I will tell everyone this: Josiah, he has quite the repertoire of interviews out there. He's been on a bunch of podcasts, specifically one of the Bigger Pockets podcast. He was interviewed a couple of times during the COVID era, and he had his own podcast, has his own podcast, is super successful. So a lot of his story is out there. So I want to touch on it, but we don't have to dwell on all the details. But give us just the quick rundown as to sort of after you left the Center for Children and Families, what brought you over to Texas and kind of what got you to where you are now.
Yeah. Long story short, I bounced around trying different jobs that never seemed to really fit. I just, I kind of started getting the feeling like I wasn't a good fit for the 9-to-5 world. I just felt pretty frustrated with that, the sitting in a cubicle all day thing. So I started, it always was really interested in real estate. And so I started trying to figure out how I could free myself from the 9-to-5 experience. And I felt stuck in my 9-to-5. I know there's people out there that are not stuck in the 9-to-5. I'm not telling you to leave your 9-to-5 if it's a great thing for you. I'm just telling you my experience. So, so I started trying to figure out how could I get out of this? And it was like, okay, I could do a startup. I could buy real estate. I could, it was all these things. And I toyed around with startups, and I had a lot of fun with that, but it's a lot higher rate of failure in that. And I got my graduate degree, and then after grad school, I had gotten my appraisal license and helped a friend start a real estate appraisal company. So, and at the same time, I got my real estate license so I could help people buy and sell homes as well. And that got me in the game. So I started learning how to value real estate, and I bought a house. I did a live-in BRRRR property, like a live-in flip, essentially. I bought it, fixed it up, rented it to my friends, stayed there more than 2 years, and then sold it. And I made more money than I'd ever made in my life doing that. So it was like a house hack. Before, I'd never even heard of Bigger Pockets. This was like, 2004, 2005. And I was doing appraisal all over Dallas, Fort Worth. And I loved it. I mean, I was working for myself. I'd helped my friends start our appraisal business. I was in my 20s. And I went from that stuck in a cubicle to like wearing blue jeans and a baseball hat every day and driving all over town looking at real estate. And I just loved it. And so that kind of got me in the game. And then I did a flip and that worked out. And when I took a break, I went and hiked the Appalachian Trail. And during that time was when 08 happened, 2008 happened. So I was just happened to be out of the market at just the right time. So I got really lucky with that. But I was doing appraisals up until that time. And so I saw all that stuff like kind of building up, like people doing these refinances on homes they had just bought, pulling 100, 200 grand out of something they bought 3 months ago or trying to. And then we would have people call us at our appraisal business and they would say, hey, I've got an appraisal. This would be loan officers. I got an appraisal. I need it to make this value. Can you make this value? And we'd be like, that's not really how this works. And they would hang up and they would call another appraiser until they found somebody that would do it. And a lot of those appraisers lost their licenses after that because after 08 happened and all those properties went into foreclosure, they started looking at the appraisals, and these appraisals that were inflated, they wanted somebody to blame. So they went after the appraisers. So,
Tavis, you weren't calling, y'all were working in the same market at the same time. So I hope Josiah's voice doesn't sound familiar to you because you were.
This guy Tavis called me every day. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is I saw that happening around me, and I ended up getting, it was exciting because I'm only a couple years in, but and mind you, I started seeing this happen. Oh gosh, it was probably 2006, 2007. I was getting opportunities to list these properties that had this happen to them. So I was getting $1 million listings, as, an agent 1 to 2 years in the business, and they were up in McKinney and they weren't very old homes, but this happened. And I was always like, what's going on? Of course I was excited about listing this property, but there was just all these kind of gray areas, and I was like, what happened? And that's exactly what it was. But it was the end user, or the person that owned it had already refied it, already pulled the cash, and they had like tenants living in them, or furnish finder, or not furnish finder, what do they call them? Oh shoot, I forget the name, but it's basically like a house, somebody that occupies the home and furnishes it, and basically pays a really discounted rate because they're kind of living in it with their furnishings. They're castle keepers and things like that. So, but I would list them and they were priced high, and I would try to talk to them about price reductions, etc. And then, it didn't take long and banks started calling me. And so when the banks started calling me, I was like, wait, what's going on? And they're like, yeah, they're not paying their payments and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, oh crap, I have no idea, man. I'm just a listing agent.
Yeah. So Josiah was on the other side of that. So seeing it from the appraiser side, I'm sure was crazy.
Yeah. It also, I learned from that by watching these other folks like just go so hardcore on real estate that it ended up ruining them financially. And so, I applied that so flash forward to, I guess it was 2017. I was a finance professor for a couple years at a university. I was teaching real estate there. My real estate class was my favorite class. And I started listening to Bigger Pockets, and I started doing real estate deals on the side. I had an investor come to me that was a good friend. He had $200,000 and he'd had a really good year in sales. And he's like, I know nothing about real estate, but I want to own real estate. And he's like, I don't want to lose my money. He's like, I'm pretty scared, honestly, to do it by myself. And I was like, well, I don't have any money, but I feel like I know how to do it. So maybe we could figure out a way to work together. So we came up with this plan of he would put in the money. We would form an LLC 50-50 on everything. And I would pay him back every penny of the money he put in before I ever got a penny of profit. And so I started running point, doing the BRRRR strategy, just finding distressed properties, buying them we started off using bank financing and our equity. And then that gradually moved to using hard money and private money so we could keep all of our money in our bank. And when you're using 100% of other people's money, it obviously opens everything up for you, because now you can buy any good deal you find as long as you've got enough equity in the bank to get things like utilities turned on and other miscellaneous expenses like that. And also to obviously service the interest payments on those things. But so we started doing the BRRRR strategy, and I was doing it while I was working. Well, this like first deal we got, it was like we gained $70,000 after the refi. And it was like, wow, this is crazy. But the only problem was we were in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we did this 2 or 3 more times, and it worked on all of them. We were getting properties, and they were cash flowing, and we were gaining equity. But we were like, I said, my only problem with this is I'm not certain how much the Little Rock market is going to appreciate over the next 5-10 years. I feel like it's just going to kind of bump along. So we started looking at other markets. We looked at Nashville, we looked at Huntsville, Alabama, and we looked at Fort Worth. And the problem with Huntsville was we couldn't find enough properties. Like, we couldn't get the volume we wanted to get. The problem with Nashville was it was already so high priced there that we felt like we were kind of too late. It was kind of like Austin, Texas, you know. When we looked at Fort Worth, I was like, the prices haven't gone crazy. There's a lot of properties out there. There's a lot of volume. So I think this seems like a good place for us. So that's kind of what we focused in on. Is like, I did appraisal in Dallas, Fort Worth for 5 years. So I feel like I know those areas really well. And so the next 5 years, we just bought as many distressed properties as we could, did the BRRRR strategy. Some of them we would get all of our money back. Some of them we'd leave $5,000 to $10,000 in. And that's important for your audience. Like, if you're doing the BRRRR strategy, you can absolutely count on the fact that you're going to lock some of your own money in the deals. Like, don't think you're always going to get all your money back, because you'll be surprised. And sometimes you got to leave some capital in there. But, you know, when we were leaving like $10,000 in a deal, we were gaining like 70 to 100,000. So we were like, wow, we just did a 7X to a 10X on our equity. And then these were cash flowing. So it's like, we're cash flow positive. We're gaining a lot of equity. And then in 2021, when the values went nuts, we were looking, and we were like, we're making like 50 grand a year on our portfolio. And we had millions in equity. So we were like, man, our cash on our return on equity is not really that good. So we started running some numbers, and we're like, wow, if we sell all these single families and move all this into vacation rentals, our portfolio profit will go from 50,000 a year to 600,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the best decision we ever made, is just moving that stuff over. And we used 1031 exchanges. We avoided taxes on all of it. And we were able to unlock all that equity we had built up in these BRRRR properties. So, you know, in my story, single family was a great place to start. But I think a lot of people run into the same problems. Like, you built, like, the values on the single families tend to, if you're in a good market, they'll go up quicker than your rents go up, and you end up, you know, your cash flow may be thin, but your equity you have a lot of equity. So the best thing, one of the options you have to unlock that is to sell those and move those over using the 1031.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you brought up a great point, because I believe that's something that, you know, was talked about a lot, right? And it's one of those things that's brought up. You hear it on Bigger Pockets conversations and stuff like that. And I've struggled with it myself with my portfolio. And, you know, the $1 million question is, where do you move it to? Right. Is okay. If you 1031 it and move it over, where does it go from there? And, you know, I think you got in at the right time, right? Getting into the vacation rentals the way that you did, the timeline that you're talking about, I know was the sweet spot of doing that. But, you know, that's something that I do struggle with a little bit with some of the rental portfolio that I have, is like, does it make sense to move it? You know, does it make sense to try to exercise that? Now, you had a partner, right? And do you still have the same partner?
Yes. Yeah, we're still 50-50 on everything.
Got it.
Yeah, and he got all his money back. That's a piece of the story I left out. About the time we moved everything over to vacation rentals, we did a refi on we bought a vacation rental in 2021, and in 2022 the vacation rental market just went insane. I mean, you guys remember. And in 2022, the property we had just bought for $425 appraised for $750. And so we did a refi on that. He got all his money back. So,
wow. And you guys are up in Tennessee, right? mostly up
Yeah,
in the
those
Smokies?
are in the Smoky Mountains. Anybody that's listening to this, by the way, I'm a broker up there, and if you want to buy a vacation rental in the Smokies, like Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Sevierville, I'd be happy to help you. So you can find my contact info.
Yeah,
You
we'll
know, in the
definitely link all that and
up. So
for
yeah,
sure, definitely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
So
I know.
let me ask you this.
Oh, go ahead, Tavis.
I was going to ask you real quick. So going back, just curious, when you bought your rental portfolio that you had, and you were buying properties in Fort Worth, what was the number of that of those doors that you had at the time, and what was your source to find them? Were you buying them on MLS?
yeah.
Were you buying them through wholesalers? What was your what was your target?
Yeah, so it was the number of properties we had was in constant flux because we would sell some, we were doing some flips, but we ended up with around 20. And the reason it wasn't more was because we started off, this is something else I see a lot of new investors do. We started off where most people do, which is buying the really cheap properties, right? Get a really cheap property in not the best area. It's got a great, cash on cash return, but then you discover that it's got a lot more problems generally with managing the tenants. You have, generally higher turnover. They tear it up more collection problems, more crime, all that stuff. So we kind of gravitated towards B class properties. And so I would say the average deal then was probably us buying it from, and we bought 95% of them from wholesalers. So we just networked with all the wholesalers in DFW, and we tried some direct marketing, and we just didn't have a lot of success with that. And I know it was because we didn't do enough of it. So I know that works. But you got to kind of, in real estate, you got to kind of choose what you want to do. And it's like the one thing, the book, The One Thing. It's like you can't be great at every piece of this whole thing. So you got to kind of choose what you want to do and go with it, and kind of let, the people that are great at direct mail and all that, like that's their thing. Like we wanted our thing to be building our portfolio and not as much concern with the direct mailer stuff. So we just we built really good connections with the wholesalers, and like we were happy for them to make some money on their deal as long as we could come close to refinancing and getting all of our capital back. So, I would say, well, one of the takeaways from that was sometimes instead of trying to make the maximum profit from a deal, trying to do the direct mailer and get the most equity and the most everything, sometimes you're trading progress for the potential profit of something that never comes. So instead of trying to be, the direct mailer who's getting the 100K equity, but you don't know that you're going to actually be able to do it because you don't have that business going. That's a business. Maybe you should be okay with taking the 50K like base hit and get yourself a bunch of properties and some momentum, and then we got more capital. You can focus on that other thing.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, we're going through that right now. Tavis and I I'm trying to push towards maybe hiring a cold caller or something like that.
Yeah.
Mark Fuller's been on the podcast. He has a great direct mail business. And so, yeah, it's from my perspective is, on the other side, you have your wholesalers, you have your realtor business. I kind of want to have some sort of control over the flow. If you can figure that piece out, it's, I can sort of feed myself forever as opposed to having to sort of wait around for someone to bring the good deal to it. Now, from your side of it, though, if you really go all in, and Tavis has done a great job over the years of developing realtor a base that comes to him and says, "Hey, I have a deal." If you did the same with wholesalers and find those really good wholesalers and say, "Look, you just bring me stuff, I'll be your guy," I think that could work out really, really well too. So we're going through some of that conversation.
Well, and that's
right
basically
now.
what Josiah is saying. I mean, the mailers work the same way, right? If that's your business model and you're really good, like Mark Fuller is, he's got that oiled machine. That's a business model that works for him. It's worked for him for the last 15 years. And that's where he's able to go through them. He's got several of them. He's piping, $10,000 a month into that business that, to run it. And then he's getting, so many leads and so many phone calls and, and they turn into contracts.
For sure.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about, so I know when you transitioned over to short term, talk a little bit about the overall net benefit of owning a short-term rental, specifically in an area that is vacation driven. It's not sort of a one-off house in the middle of Richardson, that you could have some short-term traffic, but that area is built with a system and cleaners and management and all that around vacations. So can you talk a little bit about some of the tax benefits and just the overall cash flow benefits that you found once you moved over into that market?
Yeah. So the biggest benefit for us was being able to scale our portfolio, and then the cash on cash return was ridiculous. I mean, we went from, on our single families, some of the deals were better than others, but I would say the average single family was like, I would guess it was like 20% cash on cash return, something like that. And then when I told Ashton this before, and I don't want everybody to expect this on their vacation rentals, but my first vacation rental deal, my first year, my cash on cash return was over 100%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I bought and another really cool perk to doing vacation rentals is if you're buying like a cabin, you can buy it as a second home, and so you can put 10% down on it. And so, you can buy a large property, which gives you that depreciation potential in the millions. So, let's say your first deal is $1 million. You're only putting $100,000 down. Well, your depreciation, and they're looking at reinstating the bonus depreciation at 100%, which would be great. But, when I was first doing this, that first year, you're able to take a massive chunk of depreciation on that property. And so, we had just moved. I mentioned this. We had gone from 50,000 to 600,000 profits. Mm-hmm. Now I've got 300,000 profit coming in every year that I got to figure out what to do for the tax liability on. So,
yep.
The best part about it was we unlocked the equity, moved it into the vacation rentals. The cash on cash went way up. So we were making well over 20%. So that metric was better. And then our depreciation base went way up. So we didn't pay any taxes for years. So we were able to take all that income, and then it even trickled down to our personal income and sheltered that as well. So it provided, we went from, on the single family, which you can depreciate single families, but our portfolio went from, we had 20, I would say the average was $250,000 value. So we had $5 million with the houses. We went from that to, now we've got 57 bedrooms. So a lot of these are like 12 and 11 bedroom cabins. So I don't even know. I don't even know right now what the depreciation base is, but it was multiples of the 5 million. I want to say maybe like 15 to 20 million now currently. Mm-hmm. So much more depreciation. So the tax benefits were massive, and then the income so good. And we ended up the business. We built a business, right? It's no longer just like us with these rentals. We hired a guy that's managing these for us now. We managed them ourselves for a while, and then these are all on Airbnb and VRBO. And then we hired a guy in-house that manages them for us, because with how many, we have so many bedrooms that if we were paying somebody 10%, we'd be paying a lot more in management expense. So we're paying more like 4 or 5% on our portfolio, and the management's really good. So our reviews are great, and we get lots of bookings, and that business is doing great. You heard all this negative stuff about vacation rentals, over the last 6 months. I know that some regulations change in places like Dallas and New York City. That's more like houses that people are Airbnb.
Yeah.
This
I was going to say, I wouldn't categorize that vacation rental at that point, right?
No, it's more like, yeah. But this stuff is more vacation. Like, you're going to the Smoky Mountains, stay in a cabin, have fun with your family for a week, and then leave, kind of thing. It's a different business than renting your house in Nashville out or something.
Right. Well, in the Smokies, I think you've told me, or maybe Aaron, who's also doing a midterm here, he owns one up in the Smokies, one of our investors. I think there's something like 13 million visitors a year to the Smoky Mountain National Park. And I think he was telling me there's the same number of cabins or similar number of cabins in the Smokies as there are over in Broken Bow. I mean, that's a really saturated market right now. And so there's just a lot of options up there.
And your season's pretty flexible, right? You don't really have like like for instance, a beach house, right? For instance, will have a season that it's more open than others, and something like that. Up there, you pretty much have a year-round season, right?
Yes, that, when we were looking at doing this, moving from single family into vacation rentals, we first thought, first thing we thought of was the beach, because that's like, well, when you think vacation, most people immediately think of the beach. Well, when we did some research, we found that, the majority of the income on those properties comes in like the summer months, June, July, and if you have something bad happen in the summer, like you're wrecked on your cash
I was
flow.
going to say then insurance.
Yeah,
The
exactly. Then
insurance
you have,
factors that come along with the beach property. Yeah.
exactly. And then so we looked at the Smokies, and it was like the cash flow is very like stable, and you do have busier times. Like the summertime's really busy.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be times in the summer where June and July, for instance, where we don't have one vacant day in any cabin for those entire month, those 2 months. Now, February is the slowest month of the year up there. We just came out of February, but yeah, it's much more stabilized cash flow than the beach is. At least the beach where I looked. I looked at the beaches in Alabama,
Yeah.
So
plus your salt water is tearing your house up. You don't have nearly as much probably capex up there, as you would in sand, sand all in your plumbing, everyone there. So,
parties,
yeah. So we'll definitely link all your stuff there. In the Smoky. Did you have another question about the Smokies there?
I did, just from a dynamic of trading up. So you went from 20 doors, and what I find interesting now, I love it. But now you're talking bedrooms. So you went from, doors, whole house, single family units to now talking bedrooms, right?
Yes.
Which is amazing. But from a unit perspective, right, from a door, it sounds like you said you have like 57 bedrooms, and you said the average are about 12 bedroom unit. So I would assume you're somewhere in the 5 doors, 6 door kind of.
Yeah, we've got. I think I have 7 cabins in the Smokies, and then I've got 7. These are like cabins in houses on a lake in Alabama. So
like a fishing a fishing camp type
fishing
deal,
cabins
right?
and stuff.
Okay.
So and that's also in our business. So it's easier to break it down by bedroom, because when you hear a door, well, on a cabin, a door could be a 2-bedroom cabin or a 12-bedroom. Those are very different assets.
Sure. Sure.
So yeah, so that's and we also break it down by bedroom, because the number of bedrooms is the revenue driver on the whole thing.
Got it.
When people book a vacation, they want to know how many people they can squeeze in there.
Right.
And so they're more concerned with like how many beds does it have, and even when I say beds, I'm talking bedrooms. I'm not talking beds. Like
sure.
Our 12 bedroom cabin can sleep like 55 people.
Wow.
So, got it.
Oh, Tavis, you could have Thanksgiving there. That's amazing.
Yeah, right.
Tavis has a huge family. They have these 50, 60 person gatherings. So, Josiah definitely send.
So another big question, Josiah. So you obviously looked at your books, and I obviously you're in a it was a great thing to evaluate, right? Say, hey, we've got $5 million worth of $5 million worth of assets, but we're only getting 10%, cash flow, right? Actually, less than 10%. You're getting 1% cash flow at that point. So, 1% cash flow, 50,000 a year, and then you convert that over to, 600,000 a year in cash flow from that model. But you also increased equity because of the timing of when you bought it. And so you mentioned one of the cabins you bought were, under 400,000, and it's now worth, it was over 750 or something like you had mentioned.
Yes.
So in that, what do you struggle with now? Like when you look at your portfolio now, obviously 600,000 is a great number. But obviously you have equity in those properties now too. So are you good just letting it ride for a while? Are you considering, moving that over or trading up or, into other areas now? Like what's the next step now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have been looking at the return on equity. That's really the metric I think that you need to pay the most attention to, right? Because if you're sleeping on the return on equity, then you may think, well, I did the burst strategy on this whole thing. I don't have any money in this. And you don't realize, hey, you've got $3 million of equity and you're making, 30 grand a year. If you put that $3 million in cabins, you could be making 250,000. So it's the same exact question now for us. the cabins went up in value rapidly, but with all the rate hikes, they've come back down a little bit. So it's much harder to sell cabins right now because people are more fearful about the markets, even though you can find better deals right now than you could a year ago. I bought one this last year, but the number of people calling me to buy has slowed down some because people are just seeing interest rate hikes and they're more concerned about what's going to happen. So I think our loose plan right now is to keep an eye on our equity and our return on equity. And when rates come down and the values fly again, we'll probably try to do a portfolio sale and sell all this and go buy, 100 unit plus apartment complexes so we can trade up again.
Yeah.
So that's like apartments, if not apartments, like self-storage or something like that,
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going to go next with, your experience with your podcast is super successful, and you've had the opportunity to interact with different masterminds and different, I know you have a couple investors there in Alabama that are friends that no one knows about. And, so what is it, who have you met? Who have you talked to that kind of expanded your vision, of what's even possible, when you first started out, and I'm sure, when most people start out, they don't think, well, I'm going to own an apartment, but in knowing, talking to you, like your vision for what you want to do, not just in real estate, but just for people in general, humanity. I mean, we didn't get into the fact that, you have a huge heart for people. You grew up in a missionary family. You want to use real estate to, kind of be this springboard into really making a difference with people. And it's a vehicle, but it's not everything for you. And, so who have you met? What are a few of the lessons that has kind of expanded your vision for what's even possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you're trying to do big things, you're trying to kind of take a step out and conquer limiting beliefs. Like, you have to first believe in yourself. You have to be able to look in the mirror and say, I can do this, even when you don't know all the steps to get there. And so, and that's kind of like a step in faith by itself. So you gotta kind of put yourself in the room to be successful. Put yourself in the room with the people that are more successful than you. And if you're not going to allow yourself that, it's going to be a lot harder on you. So, I would say, like, the first thing I did was just say, I want to do something different than the 9-to-5 route. And then it was like reading every book I could get. And it was a podcast. And that's one way you can surround yourself with people that are doing much more, like, scale wise than you're doing. Is I just immerse myself in bigger pockets. I listen to every episode. Some episodes I listened to multiple times, and I got involved any way I could. And I ended up having Brandon Turner on my podcast. He invited me to the first real estate mastermind down there in Hawaii. I go down there. Well, I became friends with Ryan Pineda. He was like sitting next to me, and Brandon, and then Brian Murray. And, I developed friendships with people like those guys. And, like guys like Brian, I was friends with Brian before they did the Open Door Capital thing. Like, they started Open Door Capital. They raised $100 million in a year to buy multifamily. So when you see people doing stuff like that, you're like, what's my limiting belief? Why do I think I can't do as much as these guys? They're working hard, they're smart, but they've also put in the time and the reps to network and get to know all these people. And they didn't just start with that level of success. They worked and were creative in their approach to everything. But I don't know if I'm answering your question, but basically the answer is, like, you got to be willing to put yourself in the room with people like that.
Yeah.
Learn from them, and then also realize you're different than them. You have your own giftings that you can use to reach your same goal. And your path in journey is not going to be the exact same as Brandon Turner's or Brian's. Your journey is going to be yours.
Yeah.
And, Tavis, you were talking about, looking at your properties and equity and how to unlock the equity and what to do. Like, this is a different environment right now than it was in 2021 when we were looking at doing this. So now you might have a portfolio at 4%, and you're like, wow, I've got all this equity, but if I trade it up, I got to trade it for 7.5% stuff. Well, that might not make a lot of sense. So it's like, my story may not be the same as somebody else's. You know what I mean? So I would just say, like, how do you get to know those people? By any means necessary. Like,
right.
Immerse yourself in podcasts, meetups, networking events. Just get to know everybody you can, any way you can.
And I think the other thing, like kind of the byproduct of that is you realize they're just normal people.
Exactly.
These are not, super brilliant, superhumans. A lot of these are just dudes that kind of put one foot in front of another, sometimes got a little bit lucky, but they met a guy that knew a guy and they put themselves in that position. But that's what's really kind of cool, is that you start talking with people that you've read their book or you've listened to them on a podcast, but then you're hearing their experience, and they're just normal people. And that's one of the nice benefits of doing healthcare for a long time is, I always say is like, it doesn't matter what kind of house I go to, what your background is. I mean, when you get home health services, you've been to the hospital, everyone's the same. It's like you're going through the exact same issues and all this. We're having the same conversations about meds and all these, things that are uncomfortable for people. It's like you're just a person. And I think that is one of the nice, because then it kind of makes it real for you. Like, man, I can do this. He's a nice guy. He's smart, whatever. But I can see myself doing this. And so I know for you, Brian, if people don't know Brian Murray, I don't know how many, doors he owns now, but he owns thousands of apartment doors. And even before Open Door Capital, I mean, he has a cool story. He, and recently he, kind of got to the base camp of Everest, and he's just a really, 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 really nice guy. And Josiah and he have a great relationship. And, so I know you started out with, real estate. That's been your springboard, but you are kind of shifting gears a little bit. You had, the Daily Real Estate Investor podcast for a long time and super successful. You're rebranding that, and kind of talk about where you see you going, what you in the grand scheme of things, what are you wanting to accomplish with some of these relationships you've developed? And, if the next year went really, really well for you, what would it look like?
Yeah. So the podcast has been rebranded from the Daily Real Estate Investor to the Josiah Smelser Show. And I kind of deliberated over what to call it, but I'm really most interested in the mindset that's required to do big things, to accomplish big goals and big dreams, more so than I am one specific asset class. So the more interesting thing in real estate to me is talking about the mindset that people like Brandon had when they built Open Door Capital, and they, how Brandon contacted Bigger Pockets to get the job of co-host of the Bigger Pockets podcast. Like, that's a mindset thing. That had nothing to do with real estate. I mean, it was a real estate show, but he wasn't using any real estate knowledge on that. So the mindset that's required to do big things is really interesting to me. So anyway, that's what the show is about now. And and I'm most interested in really just making a positive impact in the world. The experience of living in Africa when I was 12 with my family, seeing how people less fortunate live, how blessed we are here in the U.S. I really want to do something to impact a lot of people in a positive way. So I'm working on a YouTube channel that's more on like entertainment, adventure type experiential content. And now I want to have a second channel that is like philanthropy work, nonprofit, like going into impoverished areas, helping people that need help, like bringing other people into that, getting them motivated and excited about doing good things and being a light in the world, because there's like, you guys know, I mean, you put content out, you'll have a bunch of positive comments, and then there will be a few in there that are just like taking cheap shots at you for no reason. It's like, there's so much of that. There's so much negativity out there that it's like, we need people on the other side that are out there putting positivity out, So
yeah, for sure. And speaking of putting yourself in the rooms with big people, I think your first interview as the new podcast and the new channel was super impressive. You went out to LA, you sat down with a guy that makes $200 million a year or something like that. Talk a little bit about that experience, because that was really cool to watch. You knowing you. So just a little bit of background. Josiah and I reconnected about a year and a half ago. I reached out. Actually, I had posted a picture from the Bigger Pockets conference. And you're like, I was on the podcast. I was like, no. And so I went back, I listened. I went out there, and, we talked about maybe teaming up and doing a podcast. And, it just didn't quite jive on that one. And I knew you had this vision for something bigger and something a little bit outside of real estate. And you had this, this heart for doing more, just kind of with philanthropy and tying everything together. And I was at the front part of my adventure of real estate, and so, that's when I reached out to Tavis and I said, hey, would you want to do a local real estate show, kind of really hyper focused local? And it's worked out, but seeing you kind of, I knew you've been having these conversations internally of like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to put my time? We have finite time. And so now that you've finally, you have this vision, and the first thing you do is you fly out to LA and you're doing this interview with this guy that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I was like, man, he's kind of kicking this thing off right, so talk about that experience a little bit.
Yeah, well, so after you kind of started this podcast, I spent the last 9 months cranking out real estate content on my channel. It was just a lot of like shorts, and that YouTube channel is going on 700 subscribers now. So, but I also spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do? Because I feel like I'm becoming less and less interested in only real estate content, more and more interested in things like how do I impact 1 million people with charity, kind of stuff, and it's and that's a luxury to be in that place, and it's because of real estate that I'm there. You know what I mean? So, but I'm like trying to figure out, okay, if I build a channel, what kind of content do I need to make to impact the most people, have the largest reach to be able to build the nonprofit the way I have envisioned. So. So on this episode with Edwin Ariave, which I would love people to check it out. My YouTube channel is just my name, Josiah Smelser. But I saw him on Erwin McManus' podcast. I think it's called Mind Shift. And this guy, Erwin McManus, is a really he's a pretty famous minister. But he used to work in like homeless ministries and whatnot. But he ended up planting a church in LA, which is like the craziest place to plant a church, because he felt like that's the place he needed to go. He felt like that was a very unchurched place. But he started a church out in LA, and his podcast is awesome. But he does a lot of work with people on like, mindset, overcoming limiting beliefs, a lot of kind of similar stuff to what I'm wanting to do. I was watching his podcast and heard Edwin's story and was just like blown away with this guy, because he basically was born in poverty. Overcame his parents being in jail, getting hauled out to jail when he was a kid. A lot of like not believing in himself to build these companies that are making, hundreds of millions a year. By my math, the guy could probably sell his businesses for over $1 billion. So
if any sort of multiple. I mean, I think he said he made 600. His businesses have made 600 since they've been in existence. And, but in the last two, he said, He'll basically replicate that in 3 years. So I mean, they're doing 200 a year. So any sort of multiple.
Last 12 months, he brought in 200 million, and I'm like, so I asked him off the show. I was like, so are you a billionaire? He's like, not yet. And I'm like, I don't know. But the interesting thing was you were talking about how these people are just people. I was down there in his house. By the way, his father-in-law is John Mellencamp.
Oh, really? Wow.
He's married to John Mellencamp's daughter, and she's on a reality show. So like, he's like, he and his wife are pretty famous actually. But I mean, when I was in his house, the guy's just another guy. He was nice, and he was just doing stuff like everybody else I know does. And I was sitting there, I'm like, this guy's probably close to worth nearly $1 billion, and he's just a guy just like everybody else I know, and he's approach life from a different perspective. But it's kind of like an eye-opening moment, just like maybe sitting at a real estate mastermind with Brandon Turner, or like getting your first house flip done or whatever. You're like, maybe I don't believe in myself enough. Maybe I need to have more faith and more belief in what I am capable of, instead of saying like, here's what I can do, and then there's a ceiling there.
That's for other people, kind of reading and sort of saying like, they know some sort of magic sauce that I don't know. And then when you hear their story and you meet them, you realize like, no, it's, they kind of put this together. Now, like you took action and you hit some timing of the market. Hey, I hiked the Appalachian Trail at the right time. Just kind of, okay, that was nice. And, but you gave yourself the knowledge base. You put one foot in front of the other. And, that's the thing about, I guess the unfortunate thing about Instagram and Facebook and YouTube is you kind of see the polished version of a lot of people's journeys that took a long time to get there, and that's the missing part. No one really shows that part. And but when you actually get to sit down with people and hear those things, and you realize, I can do this. They started with one flip. Well, I just did one flip. They started with one 1031. I can do a 1031. And honestly, there's a lot of people I've been working with here in the Dallas market on the and income side. They would be perfect to fit over into I've actually told multiple people about Tennessee. It's like, you probably should look over here on the short term, rental, the Airbnb over in Tennessee it's a good market, and so they're not that far away from being able to take advantage of some of these bigger things, so that's what I love about your story. You're a great example, and I knew you when, we worked at a nonprofit and neither one of us were making very much money, and it was one of the town, Monroe, Louisiana, there was no one there, is getting a huge leg up on life, but, just kind of finding your path and, putting one foot in front of another. It's like, it just happens, and 15 years later, you're doing great,
One of the,
I appreciate that.
One of the quotes, or statements that's out there, right? When you talk about money and you talk about people, and I just mentioned this to my son the other day, but it's the conversation of money doesn't change who you are, right? It just amplifies who you are. And so, it kind of goes back to what you're saying, Ashton, about, people are people, right? At the end of the day, you're in a room with somebody that's just another person. But it truly, money, as you make more money, it just, again, it amplifies the character of who you are. And so whether you're a bad person with no money or you're a good person with lots of money, it kind of just depends on, on who you are, right? And what your character is and what's important to you in life. And, can be used as a great tool, in that sense, if you do make more money. But yeah, it's just something, because people talk about that all the time, regardless of who you are, if you make more money or you have the limited belief, people say, I don't want to make more money because I don't want to change who I am. At the end of the day, it's an opportunity to get where you want to go or reach more people or, whatever your purpose is in life, what your why is, and I remember, hearing that on your recent podcast, and we talk about that a lot, but it's figuring out the why, and your why can change and it will change, over time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Josiah, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. Getting to see the very beginning of the next chapter. I know you've got a lot of big things. You've got a big interview coming. This is a warm-up interview for you to do, another big one with Brandon, I know. So, the idea that you're taking time with us, I joked with Josiah. I was like, we'll see which podcast gives you a little bit of a bigger bump. The Real Estate Heavyweights or the Brandon Turner, his podcast that he's got going now. But I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your experience and your time. If you haven't had a chance, I don't know how many people out there have looked up your stuff yet. I'm going to link it and everything in social and put it out there. But if you haven't, go back and listen to some of the longer interviews. Definitely check out the YouTube channel. We'll link all that stuff. So are you still are you going to basically do interviews on YouTube and put it on your podcast? Is that kind of how you're thinking you're going to do both channels, or?
It's all kind of in flux right now. I'm in that entrepreneurial phase where you're out testing and iterating and trying to figure out, everything. But I do know that my content type is going to be the more like adventure, entertaining type stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the second channel is going to be philanthropy. But my podcast, is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all that. So that stuff's going to continue to go there. The audio. So it's yet to be determined whether I'm going to keep cranking out video podcast episodes or not.
Okay.
Because I don't want to be spread too thin and doing too many things at once.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
So-
we'll link it all. Check it out. You've done a lot of really cool interviews on the podcast. You've got the new, the new interview you did out in LA is awesome. And I hope you have some more kind of lined up. And if there's anything that we can do, if there's anyone over here in Dallas we can help you connect with, I would love to play a part in whatever your chapter is next. And so I really, really appreciate it. Tell the family hello. And I want to push some people to Tennessee. I mean, I've said if I get enough passive income to where I can get a Tennessee cabin, that's probably what I would do first for a short-term deal.
Sorry, I wanted to ask this real quick, Josiah, because we didn't bring it up before, but for instance, everybody jumped into the Broken Bow deal after, through COVID, right? And now there's talks of it being oversaturated and being very difficult to get into. Obviously, the Smokies are much bigger and it broadcast over a lot bigger geographical location.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on that? Is it getting oversaturated? Is it still a good opportunity to get into something out there? Or what's your thoughts as far as 2024 goes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that based on what I've been observing, it's not oversaturated. There are, my strategy, which is what we've done, I would advise everyone, look at doing this if you're going to be up there, is you want to buy well-located properties, right? Even in Broken Bow, if you buy a really well-located property, it's probably going to do okay. Right? It's the ones that are built out from town that are, don't have the access to the major attractions that are going to get hit the hardest. Just like, well, I don't know if that's the best example. I was going to make an example. I don't know if it's the best example, but our properties are still renting out very well. The occupancy is great. Our cash flow for our portfolio is very similar to last year. So we haven't really seen any dip with the cash flows or anything. The occupancy is good. It's stable. And there's so much vacation traffic up there that well-located properties are going to stay booked up because people want to stay close to the attractions they're going to be going to in town. So I would say now if they built 10x the cabins up there next year, yeah, we'd have a problem. But, the fact that building costs have gone up so rapidly and then interest rates have gone up so rapidly, the building has really slowed down a lot. So they're not cranking out the volume of new properties they were. And so, yeah, I feel like it's pretty stable.
Can you still pay cash for something under $1 million up there?
Tavis is starting to do the math. He's doing the math for himself. He's not saying it yet, but he's doing the math.
Well, it's just it's one of those things. You ask questions of the right people.
Yeah,
right?
no. I hope you get a cabin up there.
You're saying, can you pay cash for something under $1 million?
Yep.
Like how do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it price points. Is there still availability to get into a decent cabin for under $1 million up there?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I tell my clients, and if you listen to this podcast 2 years from now, obviously, you're going to need to update this. But I tell my clients, we try to find stuff at $200,000 a bedroom or less.
Got it.
Obviously, since rates have gone up, we're looking at less than $200,000 to make it cash flow well. But you can do the math. You get a 3-bedroom cabin, you're looking at $600. So
got it.
As you go down on bedrooms, the price per bedroom goes up. So that's why we gravitated towards buying the larger stuff. We got a 12-bedroom for $1.8 million. So and now that's a lot of that stuff's going for over 200. So there's deals out there, and there's deals right now out there because people are more fearful about buying right now. And I predict that rates go down over the next 12 to 24 months, and the values on these are going to go up. So this is actually a good window to buy if you've got some money sitting there and you've always wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Tavis has a commercial building. He got a soft offer on. So I don't know if he's thinking about cashing out on his commercial building. He's like, oh man, let's go get a cabin.
That's, it's one of those things, but I will tell you with the commercial, what's nice about it is triple net, right? So it's like, do I want to get into it, roll that into another triple net situation? Because there is something nice about when taxes and insurance go up. It's not, doesn't affect me personally, right? It goes back to the tenant. So there is something very nice about that compared to when I look at my midterm portfolio, and I'm like, oh gosh, man, these expenses, between taxes, insurance, and cleaning fees, and I look at that, or even just my stupid AT&T, internet, and internet's not bad. It's the cable, right? It's having the streaming TV options, and those numbers, I swear, like every 6 months, I just see it tick up another $10-15, and I'm like, what do you do, man? You're stuck.
Yeah. To me, the vacation rental asset class is a stepping stone. It's a stepping stone. It's a good intermediary between single family and commercial. And I've got a guy that's got 2 apartment complexes that he's got his apartment complexes under contract to sell, and he's wanting to move into vacation rentals because he wants to move down. Like, he wants to have the ability to sell things off one at a time if he
have
wants
more control. Yeah.
And he thinks the cash on cash is going to be higher for him in this. So, there's perks to it, but I would definitely say, like, for me, like, I hope in the next 5 to 10 years, I can bundle this stuff up and sell it because it's served its purpose for us. And now, we were talking about this earlier. I need to unlock the equity that's there,
right?
And trade that up again.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
Makes sense.
Well, Josiah, man, thank you so much. Definitely appreciate the time, all the wisdom, and we'll link everything for everybody out there. Put it out on social, and definitely great luck in your new endeavor.
Same to you guys, man. I'm loving this podcast y'all are doing. Y'all keep going. You're doing an awesome job. I predict great things for you guys.
Well,
awesome.
Thanks, Josiah. We appreciate you, man.
All right, man. You guys, we'll talk to you soon.